Introducing the remarkable archetype, the dangerous gentleman. With a demeanor that commands respect and a hint of potency, he embodies strength tempered by virtue. Though his capabilities could veer towards danger, he channels his power for noble causes, serving others and safeguarding those in need. Rooted in a profound love for both God and humanity, he navigates life with discipline and purpose. In his presence, one witnesses the harmonious blend of power and benevolence, a testament to the true essence of masculinity. Step into the world of the dangerous gentleman, where strength is wielded for righteousness, and discover a captivating embodiment of honor and valor.
Welcome to Monologues with the Dangerous Gentleman. Yes, I am the Dangerous Gentleman. No, I did not give myself that nickname, but I certainly have earned it. Today we're going to talk about one of the biggest lessons I learned over the course of my life. I like to call it radical responsibility, and responsibility isn't anything new, but for me, it was. You see, for the first 4 decades / 40 years of my life, I blamed anything and everything but myself for the things that were happening in my life. When I tripped and fell, it was the ground that tripped me. Or if I slipped on the ice, it was the stupid ice that tripped me. Inanimate objects were to blame. I would blame inanimate objects before I would take any responsibility for myself. Or I would blame other people. Or I would blame circumstances. I would blame the weather. I would blame things that were completely and totally outside of my control. That's what I did most of the time. Every once in a while, there would be a shift, and I would take all the responsibility for everything. So it was these massive swings from either it's not my fault at all, which was most of the time, or everything is my fault, and I would beat myself up and for things that I didn't do. So for things that I did do, I didn't take responsibility. And then I would try to take responsibility for things that were not mine. So everything was completely and totally outside of my control. And that's how I got into a situation where my life was completely, totally out of my control. Like nothing. Well, it wasn't, but I felt like it was. That's when I started using drugs. I started to drink alcohol, and I lost my home and I lost everything. The way I really learned this lesson was I was walking through the streets of Spokane. This was December of 2016. It was bitterly cold that day. I didn't own a car that worked, and I had to go downtown Spokane to a doctor's appointment because I had been suffering with some kidney stones, which those aren't fun to deal with. That's a whole nother story. So I was downtown Spokane for a follow-up, and I had to take the bus down there, and so I was completely reliant on other people's schedule. And so I was walking from my appointment to where I needed to catch the bus. It was bitterly cold and the wind was blowing, and I was pissed off at the time. I was mad at God, and I was blaming God, and I was blaming attorneys, and I was blaming my ex-wife or soon to be ex-wife. I was blaming this person. I was blaming that person. I was blaming God, right? Like it was like he did that to me. And I was having this conversation about forgiveness. And I was like, you know what, God? If you bring these people into my life and they apologize to me, I will forgive them. And I was like, people tell me I'm not forgiving. And I was like, if they come to me and they apologize to me, I will forgive them. And I remember I was walking through this alley where it was a little bit protected by the wind. And I came out from this alley, and I got hit with this gust of wind at like 30 miles an hour, bitterly cold. It was literally like getting slapped in the face with an ice cube. In that moment, I knew it was like God doesn't really audibly speak to me, but I knew exactly what was being said. Andrew, these people may never come to you and apologize. Your ex-wife may not ever come to you. You may never see her again. And if you do, she's not likely going to apologize. So you may never get the opportunity to have her apologize, but you have to forgive her anyway. And I knew at that moment that was exactly the lesson that I needed to learn, that my forgiving anybody else is not about them coming to me and apologizing. Forgiving other people is 100% on you, on me. That moment, it was on me. And at that moment is when I started to really work towards forgiveness. And so I took responsibility for that forgiveness. And I still blamed other people. Like, it wasn't an instantaneous, like my brain shifted and all of a sudden I started thinking other ways, right? I started the process of taking responsibility for doing what I had to do, regardless of whether or not anybody else did what they had to do. It was that one thing in that one moment. I started to be like, okay, this is one thing that I can do. I can take responsibility. There were still so many things in my life were out of control. I was living in a sober house and again, still had no car, didn't really have a job, and I didn't have the current job that I have now. I was in Spokane. Now I'm in Yakima. So it was within a couple of weeks after that. I've told the story of how I ended up in Yakima, but it was when I got to Yakima and all of a sudden I'm completely out on my own. And I don't really have other people to blame. I don't have other people to take responsibility for, but I also am the only person who's responsible for myself because I was living by myself. I was running a business by myself that I had never done before. I was in a completely new town where I didn't know anybody and everything was on my shoulders. And so I started to learn how to take responsibility. And I started to learn that these things are inside of my control. And I can't blame other people. I can't blame anyone else at this point. I can't put the responsibility. I can't blame my mom and dad for the situation I'm in. I can't blame God for the situation I'm in. God just puts his law. He created the universe. And yes, he is 100% sovereign and he is in control of things. But most of the things that happen to us are directly the result of our own actions. And so I went through a season where I took everything on myself. I held myself 100% responsible for everything. And there's some benefit to that. Jocko Willink, he has a book called Extreme Ownership, and he has a speech, a TED Talk, where he talks about extreme ownership. And I 100% believe in that concept. You should own anything and everything that you can. So my idea of radical responsibility takes extreme ownership. So you should own everything that you possibly can, but nothing that you shouldn't. Because there's a danger in not taking responsibility for anything, but then there's also danger in taking responsibility for everything, for things that are not your responsibility, for things that you're not supposed to own. So if you're not taking responsibility for what you can, whatever that circumstance, whatever that situation, whatever it is, controls you. You don't control it. But if you can own your portion of the responsibility for it, then that thing no longer owns you. That thing no longer controls you. So if it's 100% your fault, own that 100% and do what you can about that circumstance or situation. Own it. If it's 50% your fault, own that 50% and do what you can about that 50% and let the other 50% resolve itself. If it's 1% your fault, if it is 99% circumstances and situations outside of your control and other people, but it's 1% that you can do something about, and you don't take responsibility for that 1%, that will control you. But if you own that 1% and you do everything and anything that you possibly can about that 1% ownership, then that thing no longer owns you. That thing no longer controls you. But if you even, like I said, 99%, it's 99% other people's fault or other things that are outside of your control. Even that 99%, if you don't own the 1% of that, that 99% will own you. But if you own that 1%, even though you're in the minority, you have 1% and everything else is 99%. That thing will not dominate you. It will not control you. You will take power over it. People talk about taking back your power, right? It's this big thing. You look on social media, influencers are always talking about taking back your power. Well, how do you take back your power? Sometimes it's by standing up for yourself, and sometimes it's by doing some of these things that they talk about. But for me, taking back my power is about owning what is mine to own. 1%. If it's 1%, if it's 30%, if it's 99% my fault, then yeah, that's easy for me. It's easy for me to see that. It's easy for me to see when something is my fault. It's harder to see when it's someone else's fault, but it's mostly someone else's fault, but a little bit mine. Okay. We live in an all or nothing culture, and our brains tend to be all or nothing. They tend to vary from one extreme to the other. It's either all my fault or not my fault at all. But being able to walk in that balance and be able to separate those things out, to create those, again, to put it in the common, like the popular word of the day, to separate those boundaries and take ownership of what you can and not carry a bunch of other stuff that's not yours. Because if you're carrying stuff that's not yours, then that starts to weigh on you. Then that becomes something that dominates you. If it's 1% your fault and you're taking on 20% of the responsibility, that's not necessarily good either. Okay, so own what you can, and when you do that, that's when that thing, that circumstance, no longer controls you. Don't let your life be dictated on other people's terms. Yes, that's part of life. Yes, that stuff happens. We can't control everything, but we can own what we can. So again, most people are either like, well, I can't take control of that one part of my life, so I'm just going to let it all go. Whether it's for their health or in their relationships or whatever. They just are like, well, I can't do anything about that one thing, so I'm not going to do anything about anything. And they completely lose control of their life rather than owning what they can. Own your stuff. Own what you can, and let other people, and other people may not ever take responsibility for their stuff. In the circumstance where it's 1% your fault and 99% outside of your control, those other people, the 99% might not ever do anything about the situation. But if you've done what you can about yours, then yes, some of that stuff is still outside of your control, but you've done what you can. You can't control what other people do, but you can control your actions and you can regulate your responses. So even if that other 99% never resolves, if you've done what you can about the 1%, that thing doesn't own you anymore. You have gained the upper hand. And if you do that every single day, in every circumstance that you possibly can, pretty soon you own your day. Pretty soon you own your week. You own your month. You own your year. You own your finances. You own your spirituality. If you spend so much time thinking about what other people are doing and not about what you're doing, you're going to get yourself stuck over and over and over again. Radical responsibility is owning anything and everything you possibly can, and not a bunch of stuff that's not yours. So I want to get intensely practical for the last couple minutes of this. One of the things that I've learned how to do is to take pretty much any circumstance that I'm in and be able to track it back to choices and decisions that I've made. For instance, if I'm late somewhere, I look back and I go, well, I didn't leave on time. That's on me. And I didn't leave on time because I did this. Because I lingered in bed too long in the morning. Or because I spent a little bit too much time on social media. If I would have eliminated that, I could have gotten here when I wanted to get here. Or I put my keys down somewhere else other than I normally put them, and so I couldn't find them. I've built habits into my life that help me to take responsibility, that put the control of my life as much as I can in my own hands. When I write out my list of goals for the day, if ever has anything to do with anybody else doing something. So don't let your goals, whether they're daily, weekly, monthly, short, mid, long-term goals, don't let those rely too much on other people's actions. If you need to accomplish certain things, make sure that those things are within your control as much as possible. Or else just build into those goals the fact that other people may or may not do what they're supposed to do. So most of the time, make your goals about anything that you can do. Make all the actions within your realm to complete, because those other people may never do their thing. They may never do what you consider to be their part. So do your part and make your goals and your ambitions and whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, as much as you can, keep that within your own control. So you're not letting other people disappoint you. And you can always go back. If you do that, you can always go back and identify where you need to improve. And it's not about where other people need to improve. It's where you need to improve, where you need to tighten the screws on yourself, where you need to do things differently and better. And you're not relying on other people, because other people will always disappoint you. A lot of times you're going to disappoint you, but that's another thing that you can keep within yourself. Okay. You can change yourself. You can't change other people. So set your goals, set your ambitions, set your daily actions based on relying on outside circumstances as little as possible, because those outside circumstances and those outside people, they're always going to have influence, right? But if you can maintain as much as you can within your own realm, within your own sphere, then the less those other people's actions are going to affect you, and the less that's going to dictate your day and your week and your month and your life. I know I rambled a little bit here, but the point is radical responsibility. Own what you can own and keep it in-house. Keep it in your own house and do what you can to get where you want to go, when you need to get there, and how you need to get there. I certainly hope you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed monologuing. As always, I said most of this for me, and I hope you enjoyed listening. I'll talk to you next time. So if you like this content, please give it a rating, a review, and share it with your friends. Also, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about me and what I'm all about and what I can maybe do for you, check out my website at thedangerousgentleman.org. That's thedangerousgentleman.org. Thank you for listening.